You just gotta go. All right, we're going. You ready?
Yep.
Going live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our live demo today. If you guys can hear me, type llama in the chat so I know we are actually live. That's helpful. And then we can get started with our awesome demo today. So if anyone can type llama in the chat, let me know you guys are here. We're ready to go. And all right. I think we're ready. I hear my voice sometimes. All right, welcome. Hello, my name is Anna. I'll be your host this evening for our live demo. Today we have Tanya Turner, and she is doing colorful portrait work with acrylics. And it's going to be an awesome demo. It's not a step-by-step tutorial though, so just giving you a heads up. That's for the mini workshop, which you definitely should think about signing up for. We're going to talk more about that later, but definitely sign up for it. It's going to be awesome. This demo is for our artists to showcase their process, to show you guys what they're all about. So stick around, watch the whole thing. It's going to be awesome. If you guys have questions, I'll be passing those along to Tanya tonight. So ask your question in all caps and then follow that with the question so I can see them clearly in the chat. I do save a few questions for the Q&A at the end, and I'll let you know if I'm doing that so we can get all the questions passed on. If we move on in the demo and I ask the question later, don't worry, we're going to get to it. So we do all these demos free online pretty much every day now. So thank you for joining. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications so you can stay up to date and alerted with when we go live like today. Our next one is going to be June 24th, Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with Allie Royston. And she is doing lifelike pet portraits in watercolor. So make sure you jump on and see that one. All right, Tanya, I am done talking now. I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited. This is my first time doing like a YouTube live. So this is going to be really fun and different for me. It's a chance for me to show off what I do and kind of my process for my art. So I'm really excited to kind of break some of that down. I brought some examples so you can kind of get an idea of where we're going today. I'm looking for some sort of like a portrait, but it's not going to be super realistic. It'll have like pretty realistic anatomy, but in terms of like trying to get it to look like a photograph, I'm not going for a photograph. And I like to use lots of different colors and textures all throughout. And you'll see a lot of plants in my work. So we'll see today, if I have time, I might throw some botanical stuff in there as well. And there we've got some more. So not your typical color palette for portraits. I like to really branch out with the colors. Even if if I'm going for something more realistic, I'll usually introduce some other colors in there as well, just to kind of keep it interesting. Because again, I'm not going for photorealism necessarily. In my mind, we have photographs, so I don't feel like an obligation that I need to make it look exactly like a photo. But there we go.
Those are so beautiful. I am so excited to see more.
Thank you. Yeah, so I don't know that we'll have time necessarily to do like a full face, but I think I've got enough time to do probably half of the face kind of zoomed in, which is going to be really fun. So I don't know. Are we ready to jump in, you think?
Yeah, let's jump in.
Okay.
And we do have some people saying hi. Shout out from
hi.
North Carolina. Somebody said they're in the UK staying up late for you, Tanya.
Oh, that's adorable. That's so nice. They're just so supportive. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
So I've already primed this watercolor pad with, this is just watered down acrylic, believe it or not. And similar to other paint mediums, I like to work kind of thin to thick. So my first layers are super watery. And then once I get more confident that everything's in the right place, then I start using it in a more opaque format. But right now I'm just keeping it this really thin base layer. This has already had a chance to mostly dry. It's dry enough for me to go ahead and get started. And I don't have a pencil because I sketch everything out in paint. I don't do pencil really at all. So if I mess it up, you get to watch me mess it up and then fix it.
We just jump right in. No fear.
Yep.
Love that.
No fear allowed, but it's acrylic. So if you make a mistake, you just cover it. It's really not a big deal. So I usually will sketch with blue. I guess I can tell you a little bit more about my color choices as well. I don't use a ton of different colors. Mostly it's just primary colors with maybe one or two kind of extras. So I've got instead of a red, this is actually a magenta because I like the purples that can make.
It does make a
I
beautiful
even have a purple as just a shortcut too, if I'm using a lot of purple. And then I have my white. This is a yellow ochre. This is more of a neon yellow if I want something a little brighter, and then an ultramarine blue. And that's it. I don't use black. I don't use gray. I don't need a ton of colors. I do buy lots of paint colors like a lot of us do. But I tend to just only use a few that are tried and true. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that, like buying supplies and then you just kind of like sit on them.
Totally. If you guys do that, let us know in the chat. Be like, yeah, I buy supplies all the time.
All right, so I've got this reference that I'm going to be using. I'm not going to adhere totally to everything exactly in here. I'm just going to take kind of bits and pieces that I like. And I think I'm just going to zoom in on probably just this section. In fact, if we want to be kind of bold, I'll just paint the part that I want to focus on. Oh, right there. So that's where I'm kind of zooming into. My reference is grayscale because I'm using colors that are a little out there, a little different. So I don't really need it as a color reference. In fact, I think it's easier if it's grayscale, you can just focus on the values and then change it to whatever color you want. I think in my mind, that's a lot easier to manage than trying to translate from color to some other color. Let me tuck that under there.
One of our viewers says they have art supplies and art supply collection, but she considers them separate hobbies.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree. All right, so I've got my thinned out with some water, ultramarine blue that I'm going to use for sketching. And I think I'm going to put this probably in the top half about right here. And then I'm going to let the neck kind of go down this way, and maybe I'll put some flowers. That'll give me some room to play at the end if I have time. So let me get that sketched out.
And when you're kind of cropping the photo before you start painting, do you think about adding those little extras?
I do, and sometimes the photo kind of hints at something. Like this already has some kind of floral thing going on. So that was a good suggestion already that like maybe I should run with that. I don't like to put it right smack in the middle. So whenever I have, the face kind of positioned off center, that gives me an extra designated area that I can add stuff later. So it just gives me some flexibility. I don't necessarily have a plan yet for what specifically would go there, but I just know that I have the room if I want to later. Or if I don't, I just chop this off right here and pretend like that's how I wanted it to be the whole time, right? So what I'm doing right now is just kind of mapping out major landmarks, mostly looking at the negative space. So looking at the space created around the side of the face, just so that I can get the shape of that jaw correct. And then we'll just really quick get some of those dark shadows kind of marked, not filling them in, just kind of marking where they're going to go.
So it is kind of exactly like sketching with a pencil.
It really is. The advantage, and I can show you right here with the mouth, is that I can do stuff like this. That is a lot harder to do with a pencil. Not impossible, but it just takes you longer, right?
Yeah, there's like more volume to your brush.
Yes, exactly. So you could just thin it out and then use that to quickly map out where your shadows are. All right. And then the left side of this reference photo, I'm sure on the camera, it probably looks almost 100% black. There's a little bit of a reflected light on the left side of the face that I can put in, but I'm really not going to worry too much about details, anything like that until the very end. And by that point, I can kind of make them however I want to make them. I don't necessarily have to rely on this. You need a reference usually for the kind of main structure and things like lighting. But, you know, little details, nah, not necessarily. So I'm just going to let this kind of go down over here on the right. Okay. So I'm going to switch to a larger brush.
Does it matter what size you use, or you kind of are just, what's your process for that?
I tend to use flat brushes. I have a preference when it comes to the shape of my brush. I usually use flats. And I've got, this is a size 4 for the lines. And then this one, what is this one? A 12, just for large shadows. Generally, working from a larger brush to a smaller brush as the painting progresses is easier. And especially on a larger painting, I will start with a pretty big brush. It's also a good way to stop yourself from getting too detail oriented too quickly. All right, so here I'm outlining where the shadows start. It may look scary to put this like dark line right down the middle of the face, but that's where my shadow starts. And if I outline the shape of the shadow, I don't even have to fill in the entire other side. I know exactly where it's going to go. And that's helpful too if you're ever life drawing. So you've got a model in front of you and you're trying to quickly sketch them. Just outlining the shape of the shadows is going to help you to draw a lot faster, especially if they're moving and they can't hold the pose very long. All right. I'm still debating if I want to include in this reference, there's sort of like a window blind kind of shadow going on. I might keep that. I might not. I haven't decided quite yet. We'll see how it looks maybe without it. And then if it needs it, I'll add it in. All right. So still keeping really, really thin layers at first. And now I think I can start breaking it down into more specifics. This base layer of magenta is something that really helps shortcut the process for me. While I'm sitting here thinking of like, what's the next color that I want to use, I already have kind of a mid-tone value. So it's something that I can decide to keep this magenta as a main part of the color scheme, or I could completely cover it later if I wanted to. I could change it. And often I do. Often I will completely change it where you barely see any. But in those cases, and I'm looking for an example I can show you. I think even on this one, I started with the magenta background, and you really only see it in little slivers. It kind of peeks through in some places. So that gives it a little bit of extra depth if you choose to cover it up and just leave a little bit here and there. Or like this piece, it became kind of the main color scheme in the face. So it really depends. And I think I might be leaning a little bit more this way for this painting. That's kind of what I'm seeing. So I think I'll do that.
And is magenta a good color to use as far as the choice behind it, or is there?
I've played around with using different colors to prime with. I've done one where I primed with yellow, and sometimes like magenta is kind of my default. Just it seems to be kind of like the most easy to adjust and change. But if I know that I'm going to be painting something that is a majority one color, for example, I did a painting of it was something that was yellow, mostly yellow. And so I primed it with purple, being that purple and yellow are opposites. That enabled me to have some little bits of a contrasting color underneath.
Oh, neat.
So, you know, sometimes you can kind of make that an intentional part of it. And other times you could just ignore it, you know. But at least you have the option, and then you're not dealing with a scary blank white piece of paper. I know that can be really intimidating when you first get going. I know I have been paralyzed by a blank canvas before. So anything to kind of get things going without you having to think too much.
One of our viewers says it's very cool seeing how you just map everything out with paint so confidently.
Well, I mean, I don't always have 100% confidence that everything's in the right place, but you kind of just have to jump in. And the confidence is that I know I can fix it. If I make a mistake, I can cover it because acrylic is opaque. So it's a lot less scary when you kind of have that in your back pocket, you know? So right now I am mapping out my highlights kind of in the same way I did the shadows. And this isn't white, this is white with a little bit of yellow mixed in. And a rule of thumb that I kind of adhere to is that highlights are warm, shadows are cool. So anytime I make a shadow color, I try to stick with blues, greens, purples, that sort of thing. And then highlights, I go with warm colors. So even my brightest highlights, I still will mix in something. It's not just straight white. And that helps to kind of, you know, keep you feeling adventurous with your color choices, because at least you kind of know, like, all right, it's not the whole rainbow I'm selecting from. If it's a highlight, I'm kind of narrowed it down to only a few colors.
Yeah, that does help the choice. I like that tip too. It's a great one.
And it helps to mimic real life. I know this isn't realistic colors, but if you're going for realism, you know, a shadow isn't gray always. Usually there's a color in it, and oftentimes it is a cool color. All right, so I've got some yellow in there. I'm really liking how that looks, but I think it's time to start getting this a little bit more specific. So I might actually do some midtones at this point. And I'm using less water at this stage.
So we're thickening up.
Yep, thicker paint for sure. Just because I'm trying to cover up some of the sketchy under layers. I'm feeling a little more confident now that I know where everything's going to go. So I'm not feeling a need to keep it very light.
So are you kind of just touching, is that more of a highlight you're adding now again?
I'm kind of working back down the value scale. So if I'm starting with the very, very lightest highlights, I'm kind of getting to midtones, maybe a little bit lighter midtones. Stuff that doesn't jump out right away as being a highlight, but is kind of on the lighter side. And if I work quickly enough, which I'm talking, so probably not. If I'm working quickly enough, I can let these colors blend into each other. But I don't, with acrylic, you just don't have that kind of time to sit there and blend and blend and blend. So I don't mind it being a little kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess impressionistic, where you can see the brush strokes. I don't mind that too much.
Yeah.
It's a painting. So if it looks like a painting, it's not the end of the world.
True. Do you typically try to blend, or it really doesn't matter as long as you're...
I think in any given piece, there's some blended areas and then unblended areas. And that's just another way that you can bring contrast to your work. You know, there's contrasting colors, and there's also contrasting textures, and areas that are really softly blended. You know, those tend to kind of fade a little bit. They don't jump out at you. So if you want to emphasize something, maybe you don't blend that area, but then maybe the background, you blend it really, really well so that it's nice and soft. And then that brings the focus. Like if we look right now at what I have, the first thing that my eye goes to is either this highlight under the nose or this area like the Cupid's bow, because it's so high contrast and not blended at all. Whereas I don't necessarily look here right away, where it's a little bit more blended, or like this part of the cheek that's kind of blended. So it's a good way that you can kind of choose what you want to emphasize in a painting, just depending on how well you blend it or not.
Another good tip. Thank you.
I try. I mean, art is not an easy thing. If it was, we wouldn't be here right now, right? And you kind of figure out what works for you. Any good advice that works, that makes you feel more confident in your painting, run with it. And if it's advice that you're like, it sounds good in theory, but you tried and it doesn't work, then that's not something to like beat yourself up over. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And just so you know, Tanya, we are passing the 20-minute mark.
Okay, cool. So I'm just kind of redefining some of these darkest shadows because they're a little fuzzy still.
Is there a good way to find shapes as you're painting?
Yes, and one of my favorite ways in terms of like double checking your accuracy, one of my favorite ways to do that is to squint. I know it feels really ridiculous and silly. And anytime I suggest that to people, they're like, no one wants to do that. But if you wear glasses, then like me, you just take your glasses off and you can't see anything. And then everything's blurry, which is the whole point. Is if you kind of look at it when it's blurry, and squinting does that, then you're kind of forced to just look at the general shapes and you're not as distracted by little details that maybe aren't as important as you think they are. I know we've all been there where we're working on a drawing, a painting, whatever, and we start getting laser focused on one tiny detail for hours, you know, trying to get that one eyelash exactly right. And then you take a step back and realize no one can see that. No one is looking that close at that eyelash, just you. So squinting helps just to kind of double check and make sure like, wait, is this the right? Do I have like the important stuff where it needs to be? So I'll sometimes do that. I'll squint while I'm looking at my painting. I've used grid systems as well, you know, drawing a grid on your reference, drawing a grid on there. I have nothing against using a grid, especially if it's something like, let's say you're painting a portrait of someone specific, like someone you know. It's got to be dead on, right? Otherwise, it doesn't look like the person. And for those situations, a grid system, or even just like a quick transfer of the general shape, at least then you can focus on the details and you don't have to worry about like, does it look like the person?
Yeah, that's true. I've also heard that it's hard to paint someone that you know really well. It's harder to paint somebody that you're like.
I think it's funny how self-portraits, when you intend to do a self-portrait, it tends to not look like you. But if you just paint a random face that you make up from memory, people will ask, is that supposed to be you?
You're like, oh, I guess so, accidentally.
It's like every single face I would sketch in my sketchbook growing up, people would say, oh, is that supposed to be you? And I'm like, no. And then I would do a self-portrait and they're like, who's that? I think that's just part of it. So I'm using my purple shortcut paint just because I think I'm going to use a good bit of it. So it's going to save me some time, and mixing it with my ultramarine blue to make it a little darker for this shadow side. And I can use this as an opportunity to correct any shapes I see that are a little not quite right.
Is this a technique that you could use with gouache as well, since it's opaque like acrylic?
Absolutely. I've done this in gouache, and it works great. Gouache, I always think of as acrylic and watercolor having a baby. I think it just, if you like watercolor, but you wish that you could cover up your mistakes easier, then gouache would be your best friend. And this technique would totally work. If you see a random water drop out of nowhere, there is a potted plant that's hanging right above my desk. And I just watered it today. And every once in a while, I'll just get one random water droplet.
Adds to the work, adds to the painting there.
It's for texture.
If you guys are painting along with us today, I'm going to put our hashtag that you can share your work with us. It's hashtag #EtcherStudio. And we love to see your work. It's just really neat to see you guys painting along. Or if you try this at a later time and you can pause and slow down a little, you can still share it with us. I'm also going to pop in Tanya's Instagram because I'm sure she would love to see it too. See what you guys do there. So I have her Instagram ready for you guys if you want to share with her as well.
Yeah, I would love to see what people make using this technique, especially, I mean, because this works with anything. It doesn't even have to be a portrait. You could do this painting your dog. So I would love to see that.
That would be cool. We can see some colorful dogs.
And, you know, I've done some pet portraits as well. And this is the same color palette that I use. So especially with animals that are like all black, like an all black cat, I'll use blue as my darkest value and kind of change up the colors because otherwise it often just looks gray when you go to add highlights in, if you're just using black and white as your paint colors. All right. I feel like we're kind of at the midway stage, getting some more structure, a little bit more defined areas. And at this point, I think I want to bring a little bit more color into here. So I'm actually going to use my yellow. I'm going to thin it out just a little. This is where you got to make sure your brush is really clean. And I am the worst at this. I will mix up my new color with blue still on my brush. Oh, well. All right. So if I thin out my yellow, then I'm going to let some of this magenta background through.
So when you say thinning it out, what?
Just with water, just to add some water in there. Because I'm not trying, I don't want to cover the background. When I add yellow on top of this, it's not going to make it look yellow. It's going to make it look almost orange just because of those colors layered together. That's kind of what it's going to do.
That's neat.
And this is going to help to give it a lot more warmth on that side. So to give the impression that the sun is hitting that side of the face.
That is very cool. I like how you don't even have to mix that orange color. You just put it right on there. You got a little orange in there too.
No, I had seen, there was an oil painter, I can't remember who it was talking about how they didn't like using acrylic because you couldn't do glazing. Where in oil paint, you can, you know, use different mixing mediums to thin out your paint and then layer it in really, really thin translucent layers to kind of build up depth and color. And for some reason that stuck with me as like a challenge. Oh, you can't do glazing in acrylic? So then I was like, I'm going to glaze everything. I'm going to try to do it the exact same way that you would in oil paint.
So is that technically how you would glaze?
I suppose, you know, is that technically considered glazing? I'm not 100% sure, but it works for me. It just gives it that extra layered depth. And I think it works just fine with the yellow for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It looks great.
Maybe with darker colors, it might not, but I usually use it with yellow. Sometimes I'll use yellow and I'll show you a little bit on the left side. I might glaze with yellow if something is too loud. So if it's too cool, and too bright, I might just add a tiny bit of yellow over the top to kind of cancel it out and neutralize it.
Mm.
So that will dry and look not quite as bright, but it almost gives it like a green tone without having to mix green. Oh, I forgot that ear, didn't I? It's just hanging out.
That's okay. We're coming back in.
It's like, you going to paint me or not? Like,
and I'm going to mention your mini workshop, which is coming up on July 15th. Tanya, you can tell us more about that if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. The mini workshop, since I'll have a little bit more time, I can go more in depth with things like proportion and measuring in terms of, because I'll be able to kind of do a whole face, I think, with the mini workshop. And I can really go into detail about how I measure, like what landmarks I look for, how I make sure everything is the right size and shape, that sort of thing. And then I'll definitely have time to get into how I incorporate botanicals and stuff like that. So it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I posted that link in the chat, guys, if you want to grab a spot now. It's on July 15th. More details, and the mini workshop is a little bit slower pace, so you can actually follow along with Tanya as well and be painting along with her.
I love that. That would be so fun.
They always are so fun. I love the mini workshops and the live demos. I'm having fun right now.
Cool. All right. So I'm getting to a point. I think I'm ready to change my background color. The ear color looks weird to me, but I just painted that. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit while I do the background, and then I'll glaze over that with some yellow and warm it up so it kind of ties in with the rest of it. So the background, if I leave it like this, it's not bad. I've got some cool contrast going on with the textures, but I think I want a different background that is going to maybe be slightly darker than this highlighted area of the face so that I get the face to come forward more, right? Darks tend to recede, lights come forward. So if I want this to be the focal point, this right now is kind of competing for attention just because of how light it is. So I think, what do I want to layer? I think I'm going to go back to my trusty purple.
And I love purple. I approve.
Yeah. My palette's always looking a hot mess. I have all this space, and yet I choose to just use half of it just because. And my colors often will end up mixing together sometimes, and I don't really get too bothered by that. Just because if they mix together, I think it helps to unify your color scheme anyway, right? You don't need every color to be standing alone, you know, screaming from the hilltops like, I am blue. It can be, wait, does that sound like Gru? No, I'm thinking of I am Groot.
Groot, yeah.
Like, I am blue. You know, it doesn't have to be every color fighting for attention. They can overlap and stuff and mix together, and it's not a huge deal. Another thing that I've kind of learned over time is that when you have large areas like this, generally you want something to change over that amount of space. So even if it's something simple like adding a tiny bit of white so that it's brighter in some places, just so I get maybe a soft gradient, something like that, that helps so that it looks intentional that I left this area empty, rather than I just like didn't know what to do and I just left it there because I didn't know what was going to go there. All right, I like how that looks. And I got to resolve this bottom area. So I think what I'm going to do is just kind of tie this purple color back in. I'm using a really big brush. I'm not being super careful because the majority of detail is focused here. So I don't need this to be all measured and perfect. I'm not trying to draw your attention there.
Does your brush strokes matter right now as well, or?
I'm not really focusing too much on that. I'm just trying to get kind of the color down. I do like that, like this particular paper has a lot of texture in it. And so when my brush starts to run out of paint, what I get are little dots of that magenta underpainting showing through. And that's just going to help to give it a little bit more texture, a little bit more depth. So I'm not really worried about trying to cover everything exactly. Same thing in this background. I intentionally left some areas a little thinner where I get some of that magenta back in. All right. So I think at this point, I actually want to go ahead and start doing some leaves of some kind.
Yay. We get to see the leaves.
We get leaves. So this is where a round brush is a good idea. Oh, I like this one. Little size 2 round brush. I like this one. And I like to use white. I'm probably going to mix a little yellow in there too, just so it kind of ties in with the rest of my colors. I don't really have white by itself anywhere. And I'm going to add lots of water so it has a good flow to it, because I want these lines for these kind of plant shapes to be nice and smooth. So I will need some more water to help that paint just glide across. All right. And then as I load up my brush, I like to kind of roll my brush as I pick it up, just so that it helps to kind of keep that pointed shape, as opposed to just scrubbing it in there and then you pick it up and go to put it down and it's shaped funny just because of the way you picked it up. And let's see, my reference photo has these flowers in it already that I might use, but I'm not going to put them there. I'm going to put them down here, kind of going across. So like this flower going right here. I mentioned my potted plant that's right above my head right now. I'm putting a lot of faith, by the way, in that hook in the ceiling. So I'm like, that's a lot of trust right there. But I have plants and stuff that I keep around just for these kind of situations. So if there's something that you love, you know, stuff that you just like to have around you, it's a good idea to put that stuff in your studio, because you can always just kind of draw inspiration from that whenever.
Oh, that's a neat idea, just to have like inspiration all around you.
Yes.
Cool.
Artists are really good at supporting other artists as well. So I like to buy artwork or prints from artists who I admire. And sometimes I will just like go, oh, they did something really cool with the color scheme. I'm not copying their artwork, but I go, oh, I need to try using some greens. Maybe I don't use greens very much. And so I can just throw some of that in my own work. And it's all stuff that if you just kind of have it on hand, that really helps, I think.
Absolutely. And speaking of artists that people love, somebody said this painting is really awesome.
Thank you. I'm hoping to give it a little more structure before we're done today. I kind of want to go in with some pens. So I'm going to let this dry while I do the rest of these flowers. And
Does acrylic dry typically pretty quickly, or what's
really fast? There are mediums that you can get to mix into acrylic to help it dry slower, if that's something that is frustrating for you. If you're always like, oh, I can't blend before it's already dry, you know, you could look into that. But I kind of just let it do its thing, and it dries really fast. So I mean, the advantage there is, of course, that you can layer and cover up mistakes really quickly. You don't have to sit around waiting for it to dry. If it's an oil painting and you made a mistake, you can either wipe it off, which people generally don't want to do that. That's really scary. Or you've got to wait for however many days it takes to dry. So acrylic definitely has some advantages there. And there's only 2 flowers that I can clearly see here, but I'm just going to repeat them and maybe change the shape slightly. I'll just pretend that there are more. Who's going to know, right?
Yeah, it's your painting.
You guys, but no one else.
we know.
Right. It'll be our secret. The whole world doesn't have to know that I just completely fudged the reference and made it up as I went.
That's the beauty of art, though, is kind of doing your own thing when you want to.
Yeah.
And guys, I'm also just going to pop in our survey. We have a little survey that if you guys can fill out for us, we would love to hear from you and just know what we're doing really well with. It's always nice to hear from our viewers, so please let us know anything that you would like to fill out on there. It helps immensely, so we'd love to hear from you.
So I'm kind of just adding some filler at this point to help with some of this empty negative space. And I really enjoy the texture that's happening down here, so I'm not worried too much about trying to cover it all up. So that's why I don't stress a lot about trying to make everything all perfect, just because sometimes in the end product, that stuff gives it more character. And I think I want a petal that just kind of overlaps over the face. So I'm just going to add a couple more, just pretending that those were there in the first place.
I like how it's not just that stark white and how you added that bit of yellow. I feel like it really works well together.
It helps to tie in with the rest of the piece. And, you know, I have used just plain white by itself. And usually if I do that, I make a point of going back to add it in other places too, which I'll show you right now with this color. I'm going to add some small highlights just so that I've used that color in other places. And it's going to help to unify it, bring everything together. So nothing really looks kind of random or out of place.
So typically if you pick up a new color, do you find a place to add it a little bit of everywhere?
Yeah, I do. Especially if it's the first time I've used that color in that painting, I'm searching for other places that I can add it, even if it's something that really only I'm like the only one who's going to know it's there. It just helps, I think, to make the piece look more complete. And I didn't forget the ear. Let me glaze that real quick so it doesn't look so out of place. Do that and a little bit of red, and that honestly might be enough for me for now to not have to think about it anymore. All right, cool. So I kind of want to play around with some pen stuff, I think.
Awesome. And we actually are just past the 40-minute mark, so we still have time. Awesome.
Okay, cool. So I can do this really quick. I've got these pens from Etcher that I wanted to play with just to add some different textures and different kind of shapes. And sometimes I'll go back behind things like this, especially if it's just little line work. I like to go behind it and give it a shadow.
Any way we can zoom in a little bit more for this part?
Of course.
Awesome. Yeah.
That good?
Yep. I'll tell you if you're off focus or center.
Oh, thanks. I know I'll get carried away and then all of a sudden I'm like over here.
Any suggestions for starter acrylic set?
I recommend that you just get primary colors in white of whatever set is on sale. I don't know that you need a ton of colors. You know, there's those sets that come with like 150 colors. You can make all that yourself. So if you were, you know, just brand new trying to find something to get going with acrylic, you know, run on over to your art store and just see if they've got some tubes. You know, you could, I've even seen people use the, you know, those like folk art, the little, the little tube, not tubes, the little, do you know what I'm talking about? Little squeezy things. I remember my mom used to use them for like decorating stuff in the 90s. They're like $1 for a tube. Those are actually not terrible. And especially if you're just trying to figure out if you like acrylic painting, that stuff is acrylic paint and it works just fine. So you could use that. Or if you're like more serious and like, no, I think I really do want to give it my best effort. Golden is really good. Liquitex. I mean, any of that stuff.
Awesome. Thank you for the suggestions.
Yeah, no problem. But yeah, it's just the colors, really, I think.
We have a kind of off-track question, but I think it's really nice to hear from you. What is your background? Formal
So
schooling?
sorry, say that again.
Any formal schooling? Are you self-taught?
I have a degree in art education, and I have been an art teacher in the public school system for 8 years. And I've been making my own art the whole time. It's not always been easy. Anyone whose education can tell you that you don't always have tons of free time. But yeah, that's what I've been doing. I knew I wanted to do something art related ever since I was a kid. So being a teacher seemed like a good fit. It just seemed like something that would enable me to help people, but also give me an avenue to make my own stuff, because I love making examples for people and, you know, that kind of thing. It's just a lot of fun for me. So, and I went to North Georgia College and State University. So if anyone is from Georgia, you know, Dahlonega, where people go panning for gold on field trips when you're a kid in like 5th grade. That's where I went to college, but it was awesome. Wonderful school.
Thanks for sharing. It's always really cool to hear where you start as an artist.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't always know what exactly I would do, and I just kind of went with the flow, and I'm glad that it's worked out the way it has, and I'm really thankful for all the opportunities I've had, and the people I've met along the way are all fantastic. I just put my whole hand in my palette. Lovely. That's up there with drinking your paint water, isn't it?
Yes, that happens quite often. All right, we have another question. How do you manage to keep your colors from drying?
Oh, like if you're going to come back to it the next day?
Well, it continues. It says, when I squeeze it out from the tube, they dry within 10 minutes.
Oh, I mean, that sounds, I mean, I'm in Georgia, so it's just humid as all get out. So I don't, I don't run into that because I'm just miserable and sweating anyway. But I have had success. I was doing some traveling and I kept a stay wet palette. And it was just a palette that had a damp sponge underneath, like a piece, imagine like wax paper. And then your paint sat on top of the paper with the damp sponge under it. And then of course a lid to kind of seal it. And that will not ever dry out. That stuff you could forget about it and then come back to it a year later and you could still paint with it. It'll smell awesome. Crazy, but you could.
That could work. Do you think that would work if you sprayed a paper towel down and put it under before you started painting or something similar?
Totally. Oh, I got a little stray mark there. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, and I've even used, if you want the like super budget option, just get one of those like Dollar Tree pencil cases, especially when it's like back to school and everything is marked down. Get you a little pencil case and just throw a crumpled up damp paper towel in there before you close it up when you're done. And that can help. But it sounds like if it's drying like right after you put the paint out, sounds like you kind of need to keep it closed anytime you're not mixing. You know what I mean? Which would be annoying, but I guess if you put, you know, a damp paper towel or something under there, maybe that would help, just to have that extra moisture so it's not just immediately drying out. So this part is scary but fun. So especially on a shadow side, I like to put some hatching marks. And you can do this with acrylic pens. You could do this with any sort of black pen, possibly even Sharpie. And it's just another way to help give detail and depth to your work. And I might even put some over here. All right, this is the part where I'm going to take a risk. I don't know how it's going to work, but you know, when you get those thoughts of, ooh, what if I did this thing? You're like, I don't know. It's like, do it. Just do it. If you're thinking, I don't know if that's going to work, do it. Try it.
See what happens, right?
See what happens. And if it doesn't work and you're like, that was not the move. I should not have done that. Then you know for next time, maybe I won't do that, but at least you're satisfying your curiosity. And at this point, I'm not looking at my reference anymore. I'm just trying to add stuff that makes me happy.
Playing around. It looks like it's kind of cool. You did like geometric shapes with the really organic.
That, you know, it's a fun contrast, isn't it?
Yeah. One of our viewers said you're the best art teacher, so they must have had you.
Oh.
Thanks for joining in.
Good grief. You can't be making me cry on a YouTube live. I'm sorry. You're not allowed. You're just not allowed.
Do you often use pen with the hatch marks for your work?
I do. It's harder when it's on a canvas, just because the texture of the canvas can kind of interfere with the marks. But if I'm working on like a panel or paper, then I love doing stuff like this. Those paint pens have been really popular lately, which is another just really cool way to add some quick detail and texture. That might have even been easier than, you know, me using a paintbrush. If I just grab a paint pen, and that will work better on a canvas. But I love doing stuff like that. And sometimes you can't even tell in the final artwork that I've done that. It's just something that makes me happy because I like the textures of it.
Yeah. I like the way it's looking. It's like it's everything you add. I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, it's just I like to add a little bit of like some soft stuff, some stuff that's like blended, and then something crunchy. I feel like it balances out.
Absolutely.
Like how salt balances out sweet. Just a little bit of something extra. Paint pens are really cool too. And these are acrylic paint pens, so it just works perfect with acrylic paint. But I like that you can make a mark and then just kind of like go over with your finger to just soften a little. If it goes on there and you're like, whoa, that was too much. You kind of have a little bit of flexibility there. But I'm kind of putting this everywhere. It's not just going in one place because, you know, like every color I've added, I'm trying to balance it out somewhere else too.
Let's talk about your mini workshop again, just in case anyone missed it. I'm posting it in the chat, but it's on July 15th, and there's going to be more of this. So if you're really loving what you're seeing, you should definitely join in.
I would love to see some people there. That would be a lot of fun. Plus, then I can kind of get into more detail.
Yeah, the mini workshop is nice. It's a little bit slower and you can follow along. So if you are like just like I am right now, like, wow, this is awesome, I want to do more, then you definitely should jump in there July 15th.
Yeah, sometimes like stuff happens really fast. And if you're trying to follow along, like right now, you know, you look down and you look back up, you might be like, wait, when did that happen? So that would be good to be able to kind of slow down and I can kind of explain the decisions I'm making in a little more detail.
And if you guys have any more questions, we're rounding up in our last 5 minutes of the demo today. So just pop them in the chat and I will translate them for Tanya to you so she can see them as well or hear them. And I'm also going to pop her Instagram in there so you guys can check out more of her work if you really like seeing this as well. And what kind of paint pen is that?
This is a, don't come for me if I'm saying this wrong. I don't know if it's Posca, that's what I always say, or like Posca, but that's the brand. If you just search for acrylic paint pen, as long as it's acrylic base, then it will play nice with your acrylic paints and you can layer it on top, no problem. Sometimes there'll be like an oil-based paint pen, which, you know, might draw on it okay, but then if you try to go back later and add any more acrylic, it's not going to sit very nice. So as long as it's an acrylic paint pen, I've seen some at Target that are, I don't know what the brand is, but it was like a Target brand and they work just fine. So, because I know sometimes the name brand gets expensive.
Back to the supply problem.
You know, I mean, it like the technique is what's important, you know, in terms of if you're just like, well, I can't do that because I can't afford the best thing. Like, you don't need the best of everything, you know. And especially if you kind of know what stuff you want to do, maybe you don't get everything super, super nice, but you get one or two things really nice that you definitely like to use a lot. Like if you love doing a lot of pencil drawings, get you some nice graphite pencils because you're definitely going to use them, you know.
I agree. And I'm going to just drop in our survey as well, guys. If you could fill that out for us, we love to hear from you guys. And don't forget to share your work. If you are painting along, share your work with us. It's #EtcherStudio. You can share it on Instagram, on Facebook. If you haven't already found us on Facebook, I'll pop that link in here too, so you guys can follow us on Facebook and see what's going on.
Yeah, I can't wait. I hope that y'all will share some of your artwork. Even if it's something that you just made recently, I would love to see it. It doesn't have to be something that you just made just now. I would love to see any of your stuff that you guys are working on. I think this is essentially done. I could fiddle with this more if I wanted to, but this is probably a good point to maybe take a break from it and come back to it the next day and then decide if it's done.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people. I'll come back to it a week later and then go, oh, I should.
Well, we just got a perfect comment for this. So Tanya, you killed it. So proud of you. This gave me all the Bob Ross vibes.
Well, we love Bob Ross, don't we?
Who doesn't love a good Bob Ross?
I will defend Bob Ross to anyone. I will fight you if you start talking garbage about Bob Ross. I will definitely defend him.
All right, I'm going to put you back on camera if you're ready and just let you say anything you'd like to the viewers to wrap us up for this evening.
Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me and for letting me share this with you. It's a rare occurrence for me to share my personal art process and how I make things with people instead of like, oh, here is how you shade. So this has been really a treat, and I'm just excited that people were able to hang out and enjoy the process with me. And I hope that I'll see you guys again at my mini workshop, where we can kind of get more into detail and hopefully I can get to know some of y'all a little bit. But yeah, it's been awesome. So thank you so much for having me.
Yay, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going back to the artwork so we can finish this lovely session with the beautiful artwork. And just wanted to say thank you guys for being here. I already see some thank yous coming in. Thank you for giving me an excuse to bust out the acrylics again.
Do it.
Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.